fund for the affected regions, regions affected by the use and testing of nuclear weapons. And in the first panel, we will be speaking about the work that civil society, international institutions are doing to push for this policies and for this treaty to be implemented in a full force. And on the second panel, we'll be joined by researchers, activists that are doing work on the global, national, and local levels and trying to connect disarmament and hard security with human security and disarmament with other issues that actually collect or create the fora, disarmament fora. So yeah, and thank you again for being here. What? Of course, before the panel, actually, we'll have a short movie screening of the movie that were created and directed by Zhanana Kurmasheva. She is a Kazakh woman director. And this short movie they produced with The Guardian. And the movie is telling the story of one of the permanent activists in the anti-nuclear movement of Kazakhstan, Dmitry Kalmykov, who is for almost or more than 30 years doing work around environmental remediation of the territories that were affected by nuclear testings. So yeah.
На самом деле, все, что вокруг вы видите, это здание, этот воздух, которым мы дышим, вы сами, все это состоит из атомов, мельчайших частиц. Все они рождены внутри звезд в ходе ядерных реакций, когда одни элементы превращаются в другие. Короче, вывод очень простой. Все, что вы вокруг видите, было радиоактивным и в маленькой степени остается. Поэтому радиоактивность – это неотъемлемое, главное свойство всей Вселенной. Родился я в Украине, в Советском Союзе, и я тогда чувствовал, что весь Советский Союз – это моя родина. Да. Для меня не было разницы, где я – в Таджикистане, в Молдове, в Белоруссии. Везде чувствовал себя как дома. А Казахстан вообще считался геологическим раем, потому что здесь такие разнообразные полезные ископаемые, их так легко изучать. Все геологи сюда стремились. Я попал в советскую армию, в военную школу, которая готовит специалистов по радиационной, химической, биологической безопасности. Служил возле Чернобыля в 50 километрах. В армии было скучно, я добровольцем попросился на следующий день, потому что наша часть имела там разные подразделения, они попали под радиоактивное загрязнение, надо было делать разведку, где какая радиоактивность, вытаскивать оттуда пострадавших товарищей, технику. Таким образом, я 27 апреля, через сутки после взрыва, был уже в Чернобыле. Вот таким образом мой детский интерес к радиоактивным тайнам через Чернобыль привел меня сюда, на Семипалатинский полигон. Все, что вы видите на полу, Это мы собирали остатки военных машин, оружия, которое испытывали при взрыве. Это был двигатель самолета, ну как в машине. А потом после взрыва бум, стало жарко, самолет загорелся, двигатель расплавился, вытек, и получилась лужа на земле. Вопросы кто придумал?
Есть.
Давайте.
Несмотря на подготовленность, там находится макет карьера. Там, я знаю, то, что тестировалось атомное оружие. И то, что там сейчас находится атомное озеро. Там добывают уголь рядом с этим. Радиация отравляет землю, добирается до угля. Как это можно предотвратить?
Угу. Отличный вопрос. Как построить озеро за 1 секунду? Надо просверлить дырочку, пустить туда бочку размером со стиральную машинку, нажать на кнопку и тыдыщ. Таких озер на Семипалатинском полигоне, наверное, штук 10. Ну, тогда не хватило ума подумать, оно же будет радиоактивное. Оно же, наверное, будет всегда радиоактивное. Сейчас последствия этих испытаний, они угрожают природе и нам с вами, и этим запасам угля, потому что радиоактивность, которая тут осталась, она вместе с подземными водами может проникнуть в уголь. А этот уголь мы потом принесем к себе домой в печку, сожжем, можем получить лишнюю дозу радиоактивности. Посчитали, что эта территория малонаселенная, нет крупных городов, труднее тогдашним врагам Советского Союза добраться сюда, чтобы шпионить. И потом, начиная с 1947 года, создавалась инфраструктура полигона, испытательные площадки, сооружения, здания, живой городок. И в 1949 году первая атомная бомба была успешно испытана. И далее по 1991 год полигон активно работал в таком в конвейерном режиме. Нельзя сказать ежемесячно, иногда ежедневно проводились ядерные испытания. Трудно сказать, сколько их было. Никто не сможет точно их посчитать, потому что Советский Союз скрывал количество испытаний. И во время некоторых испытаний взрывались сразу 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 так называемых устройств. А объявлялось одно в Советском Союзе проведено ядерное испытание. На самом деле мы жили там на полигоне очень долго, всего я посчитал около 1,5 лет, там непосредственно на земле. Мы отбирали пробы, то, что называется окружающей среды, почвы, растительность, осадки в водоемах, донные их отложения, все подряд. Потом это анализировали в лаборатории, выносили на карту.
Ну и, конечно, надо подумать по части опытной поля тоже, потому что там же тоже ближайшие 100 тысяч лет ничего не делаешь.
Каждое ядерное испытание – это сложнейший научный опыт. 1000 разных приборов, расположенных на территории 3 квадратных километра. Каждому прибору кабель. Это кабельные лотки. Это штуки, в которых укладывался кабель, сверху закрывал, чтобы его не повредили колесами, ногами. Это вот оборудование, которое применялось в Советском Союзе для ядерных испытаний. Но чистое оно или грязное, никто не знает. Но вот это часть того, чего должно быть на всех полигонах. Но здесь не хватает главное – заботы о коровах, лошадях, о людях. Здесь должен быть забор, потому что корова читать не умеет. Она здесь паслась, потом пошла туда пастись. Молоко принесет домой. Мы сейчас вот тут стоим. Дальше мы поедем на атомное озеро сюда.
Атомное озеро, да?
Да.
Каража, да.
А вот Каражара.
Атомное озеро вот стоит. Вот правильно, да, дорога.
Ага. По которой мы ехали сейчас.
Да.
Вот, да. По ней и пойдем.
Біз тексеретін аппаратымыз жоқ қой енді. Біз далада жүреміз, мал өсіреміз. Осы жер шауып аламыз, шөбімізді. Жинақтап аламыз. жүрміз енді. Дәл осы полигонның открытый полигон дейді енді, кім білсін енді. Осы қаншама кісілер ауырып жатыр мысалы. Туған апайым бар, инвалид.
Я недавно дочитал книгу про этих сталкеров, чернобыльских, ну, знаете, да? Так вот, там было много разных существ, которые как бы возникли в радиации. И там были какие-то еще необычные способности. Что-то такое возможно возникнуть, какие-то такие вот.
Это трудный вопрос сказать количественно, как радиоактивность влияет на людей. Дело в том, что зависимость полученной дозы и полученного эффекта для здоровья не прямая, не линейная. Радиация действует статистически. Если вы получили какую-то дозу радиации, у вас вырастает вероятность того, что вы заболеете каким-то из этих нехороших заболеваний. Никто же не знает, где пасется эта корова, у которой вечером хозяйка доит молочко и кормит деток. Где эта корова гуляла, какой она кусок радиоактивной грязи нашла или кусок ядерной бомбы, который валяется в степи.
Мен айтайын, бұл полигонның эпицентрі. Мына ең бір сатылған надземный дейміз, ең бір көл осыдан 10 шақырым жерде тұр. Саржалдан 20 шақырым жерде тұр. Әрі дегенде мына екінші атылған көл дейміз, искусственный озер 1000 тұр, осыдан 15 шақырым. Енді қолымда дозиметр бар, япондар беріп кеткен. Осыған қарайымда дозиметр көріп алам, сосын бүгін бұлай, бүгін ертең, бүгін мында шығарам мен.
Мы не можем изменить прошлое. Было много ошибок, люди страдали и продолжают страдать. Но меня больше всего волнует, что не прекращено это пагубное воздействие. Он продолжает забирать здоровье и тысячи лет недопрожитых жизней, хотя это очень легко предотвратить. Надо, я думаю, допустить в свое сознание всем мысль, да, ядерное оружие может быть применено. Вероятность очень высокая. Потому что вот тот розовый туман, в котором я вырос в советском детстве, все люди братья, это все разрушилось, исчезло, и сейчас вот такая жестокая реальность. Казахстану надо думать, как строить свою независимую политику, чтобы опять не обжечься вот на тех же граблях. Мой подход в жизни такой: надо надеяться на лучшее, но приготовиться к худшему. Мой подход в жизни такой: надо надеяться на лучшее, но приготовиться к худшему.
Dear friends, we hope you liked the screening of the film. So this is a part of the larger film, which is called We Live Here. The major part of this film is about a nuclear testing survivor, Baltabek, who is from Sarjal. And he is also a member of the Semey movement. And we would like to say thanks to the director of the film, to Zhanana and her team. And I think this film sets a perfect tone for our today's discussion, because we are going to talk about the past, present, and future, and how we're going to connect these discussions about peace and disarmament. I hope everyone hears me well here. Perfect. So then we shall begin. So please welcome the first panel of our today's event. My name is Älisher Khassengaliyev. I am a co-founding member of the Steppe Organization for Peace, one of the co-organizers of today's event, and I'll serve as the moderator of this panel. So before we begin, I'd like to briefly frame our discussion by introducing the core elements of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, particularly Articles 6 and 7, which are central to this panel. TPNW, the treaty, is the first international instrument not only to prohibit nuclear weapons, but also to recognize the humanitarian consequences of nuclear testing and use. Article 6 requires state parties to provide victim assistance to individuals affected by nuclear weapons use and testing, and to take necessary steps toward environmental remediation of contaminated areas. These responsibilities are grounded in principles of non-discrimination, inclusion, and respect for the rights and dignity of affected communities. Article 7 complements this by establishing international cooperation and assistance. It recognizes that many affected countries cannot address nuclear legacies alone, and that support, technical, financial, scientific, and humanitarian, must be shared across the international community. Within this framework, state parties have begun discussing the creation of International Trust Fund under TPNW. We're going to talk a lot about it today. The fund will be a practical mechanism to channel resources toward victim assistance, environmental remediation, research, and capacity building. Its design is still evolving, like we don't have this fund yet, but as of now, it represents the most promising instrument for turning the treaty's humanitarian commitments into tangible improvements in people's lives. And our panel today will explore these processes from diplomatic, humanitarian, civil society, and community perspectives, looking at what works, what challenges remain, and how implementation can become more inclusive, transparent, and locally grounded. We have wonderful speakers today with us, and let me introduce the first. Gauhar Mukhadjanova. Gauhar is the Japan Chair for a World Without Nuclear Weapons and Director of the International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation. Her work is focused on multilateral regimes, institutions, and negotiations in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. She served as the NGO advisor on state delegations to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, other treaty in the disarmament sector, and several preparatory committee sessions. Ms. Mukhadjanova is a principal author of a series of reports monitoring implementation of the NPT Action Plan. She's also co-author of some wonderful books. And Ms. Gauhar Mukhadjanova is joining us online. She's here. She will provide an overview of diplomatic discussions around victim assistance, environmental remediation, and the Trust Fund. Gauhar, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adia. That's a very nice introduction, and thank you for having me as part of the panel. I'm sorry I cannot join you in person. I was fully planning to be there, but COVID interfered, so I have to do this online. And as Adia said, I will just talk a little bit about the kind of the current diplomatic discussions around this issue, and I hope that Älisher and Veronique can also add, because they are, I think, much closer to action in this regard. But as Adia already mentioned, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is rooted in the humanitarian principles throughout the push for the negotiations. And during the negotiations of the treaty, there was particular focus was on centering both the catastrophic impact of nuclear weapons use and testing and survivor experiences. And therefore, the treaty does include positive obligations on provision of victim assistance and remediation, as well as cooperation in this regard through its Articles 6 and 7. I'd like to note that Article 6 creates an obligation for states parties to provide assistance to those affected by nuclear weapons yet to testing and use under their jurisdiction. So it doesn't create an obligation for those who it doesn't create direct obligation for those who weren't responsible or who don't have the victims under their jurisdiction, and doesn't create an obligation on itself on states that are outside the treaty. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the provision of assistance in this regard in international cooperation has become important, because if you look at the treaty membership, of course, it is primarily developing countries, and there is a certain resource problem there. And also there's an issue of fairness and justice, where states whose citizens have been affected by testing and use are not the ones responsible for carrying out, in many cases, such testing and of course, the use. So that kind of necessitated this idea of having an option for other countries in a position to do so, to provide assistance to states or under whose jurisdiction there are victims of use and testing. And so in this regard, during the first meeting of states parties of the TPNW, the states parties agreed on an action plan establishing an intersessional process to really institutionalize the treaty and to discuss more the different aspects of implementation of Articles 6 and 7 among them. Kazakhstan and Kiribati became co-chairs of the informal working group on our implementation of Articles 6 and 7, and among other things, they were charged with discussing the feasibility and propose possible guidelines for the establishment of an international trust fund for affected states to exactly facilitate the provision of assistance to affected communities. Since then, they have been carrying out consultations with state parties and civil society. But as Adia mentioned, there is no decision yet. There is no trust fund yet, and there are both sort of economic and political reasons for that. After the first set of consultations in the first intersessional period, Kazakhstan and Kiribati submitted their report to the second meeting of state parties, where again it wasn't ready yet for a decision on the trust fund. The decision was rather to task them to continue consultations and prepare more exact recommendations on the feasibility of establishing the fund and draft some guidelines for its establishment. And that's what they did in their report to the third meeting of state parties that took place in New York in early 2024. And there they reported that generally there is broad support for the idea, especially from the affected communities. This is seen as very important by them. They have looked into the various precedents in the international law and practice. Different trust funds for assistance already exist in different frameworks, of course not in the nuclear weapons sphere, but in others. But along with the kind of positives, they noted that there still exist differences of views on some of the crucial issues for the establishment of the fund. Among the questions that they asked the participants of the consultations and posed to themselves, two really stand out as being kind of sensitive, is that who should be allowed to contribute to the trust fund, and how the decisions should be made on granting the assistance, on the disbursement of the assistance once the fund is operational. And here they had different feedback from different states, who some of them are concerned about the degree of involvement of the affected communities themselves, the participation of non-governmental organizations and academia. What kind of role are they going to play in running of the fund and in making the decisions about who gets assistance? Then there are some issues with regard to how the impact would be monitored and assessed. How do you really make sure everything is fair? And then on the question of who gets to contribute to the fund, I think that became especially politically sensitive. First is the concern of states parties themselves about creating a new financial obligation to contribute. Yeah, it's emphasized numerous times that the fund would be voluntary, but still states parties and signatories of the treaty, a lot of them developing countries, have severe budgetary constraints and domestic kind of obligations not to agree to additional financial obligations. So they needed to make sure that any decision on the trust fund does not create for them the obligatory need to contribute. Another issue is, okay, well, then we need to probably open the fund for contributions from other actors outside the treaty, and that's something that the affected communities themselves favor. I think they think it would be fair and useful to have others contribute to the fund, but then again, that becomes the politically sensitive issues where what would be the role of those donors in making the decisions, and are you going to establish a fund where contributors outside the treaty then will have kind of the influence and decision making on who gets the assistance. And then some of it is just optics about the states that absolutely refuse to join the treaty, but they are favorable kind of to financially contributing to the fund. And here we can think about countries like Switzerland. I don't think anybody's going to object to them contributing to the fund, but then you also have military allies of the United States and other nuclear weapon states, and there it becomes a bit more sensitive. So far, there was no decision again on the establishment of the fund, and the co-chairs of the working group now still have the task to further conduct consultations and bring something to the review conference that could be transformed into an actual decision about the establishment of the fund. And the review conference of the TPNW is scheduled to take place in November 2026. Now, in the meantime, I must note that Kazakhstan and Kiribati introduced perhaps a little bit more of a complication to this debate by taking the issue to the UN General Assembly. So this all is, so far, that the whole discussion of the trust fund is happening within the parameters of the TPNW. But last year, Kazakhstan and Kiribati introduced a resolution to the first committee proposing to convene a meeting on victim assistance to those affected by nuclear testing and use, and to convene such a meeting under the UN banner in 2026. And so from the point of view of some of the states parties to the TPNW, this was kind of a premature thing to do before there's more clarity among the TPNW states parties themselves about the issue of the fund. To be sure, they didn't introduce the fund itself into the General Assembly, but at least to have this meeting to discuss victim assistance. The resolution enjoyed generally broad support, and this year again there was a resolution on further modalities for the meeting. There were only 4 votes against, I believe, and 5 abstentions, but it did open kind of the whole issue to the criticism. And if you look at the explanations of vote of those who voted against, then you can see that some of the nuclear weapon states have taken a very decidedly negative position. And so that could be detrimental kind of in the future. On the other hand, I don't think anybody expected Russia and France to jump on the opportunity to provide financial assistance and contributions towards remediation and assistance to the affected communities. I won't go into detail here, but I found Russian explanation of vote at this year's first committee particularly unpleasant in this regard. But be as it may, there is broad support in the General Assembly so far to have a discussion on victim assistance. And in the meantime, the work will continue within the TPNW intersessional process on preparing a decision to be taken at the review conference in 2026. And considering that the civil society has been involved in these discussions as well, I think Älisher might be in a position to provide a bit further detail about where the discussions stand in this regard. I'll stop there.
Yep. Thank you so much, Gohar, for your contribution. Yes, certainly the TPNW processes are full of its own issues. But yes, thank you so much for the insights. We will proceed to our next speaker, Älisher Khassengaliyev. She's the head of policy in the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, again. Previously, she was a researcher at the Arms Control Association and the Brookings Institution. She has published numerous articles, editorials, reports on nuclear weapons, and also provided expert analysis for several newspapers, including Associated Press, the BBC, Reuters. Älisher holds BA in International Security from Tufts University and MA in the International Law of Armed Conflict from the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. And Ms. Älisher will speak about the role of civil society and ICANN's contribution to advancing this process within the TPNW framework. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and it's great to be speaking alongside my fellow panelists. I'll just start out, for those who don't know who is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. We're a global civil society coalition of more than 700 partner organizations in more than 100 countries, including here in Austria. There's an ICANN Austria. Unfortunately, my colleague wasn't able to be here today. And we are working to eliminate nuclear weapons worldwide. And our main tool to do that is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted at the UN in 2017 by 120 governments. And we're now trying to get all of the governments in the world to join this treaty and to implement it fully. So the treaty is really unique, I would say, not only for its positive obligations to establish an international framework to provide victim assistance and environmental remediation, so actually addressing the harm that nuclear weapons have posed over the decades that they have been in our world, but also because, particularly for an international treaty, it's very inclusive. So there aren't really a lot of international treaties, particularly in disarmament, in nuclear weapons law, where civil society coalitions like ICANN are able to have not quite an equal seat at the table, but to be very involved in the process to decide how the treaty will be implemented. And so I'll speak a bit about what are the commitments to inclusion within the treaty and how states have been implementing them, as well as how we can continue to take that forward in the future. There's always room for improvement, and at ICANN, we're always trying to promote more inclusion of civil society and particularly affected communities in this process. So to speak a bit about how inclusion is in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in the text itself, you can see that within Article 6 of the treaty on the obligation to provide victim assistance and environmental remediation, where governments committed to do this in accordance with applicable international humanitarian and human rights law, and to adequately provide age and gender sensitive assistance without discrimination. And some of this language I wrote in an article with Bonnie Doherty that was published in the International Review of the Red Cross, comes from previous commitments to inclusion from other disarmament treaties and from human rights law, including the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So this language has a kind of a strong weight in terms of how it should be interpreted and how people should be included in the process. And since the treaty was adopted at the first meeting of states parties to the treaty, so the first time when all the countries that have joined the treaty came together to meet to discuss how it would be taken forward, which actually took place here in Vienna in 2022, states agreed to the Vienna Action Plan. So this document that I think has been mentioned, which spells out in further detail how states intend to implement Articles 6 and 7 in particular, but the treaty as a whole. And in this document, there were several specific actions about inclusion, about how different stakeholders, including civil society and affected communities, should be involved in the implementation of the treaty. So specifically, they committed to work in a spirit of inclusivity, cooperation, and transparency, to cooperate closely with stakeholders, including ICANN, academia, affected communities, and other civil society, to integrate gender considerations across their work, and to facilitate the active participation of relevant stakeholders and take into account the different needs of people in affected communities and indigenous people. So that's across the board in terms of how states implement the treaty. They should adhere to all of these principles. specifically in their work to implement Articles 6 and 7 on victim assistance and environmental remediation and international cooperation. They committed, one of the actions in this action plan is to engage with relevant stakeholders, including international organizations, civil society, affected communities, indigenous peoples, and youth, and work cooperatively to advance the effective and sustainable implementation of Articles 6 and 7. And another really strong standard for inclusion was in another action which stated that states will closely consult with, actively involve, and disseminate information to affected communities at all stages of the victim assistance and environmental remediation process. So these are really, really strong commitments that states have made towards including stakeholders throughout their work to implement the treaty. And at ICANN, we've been working with states to ensure that these commitments are implemented, including in our role as the civil society coordinator of the treaty, for the treaty. So how have states been working to put these commitments into practice since this action plan was adopted in 2022? So there have been a lot of different ways, and particularly looking to how the co-chairs that Gawker mentioned of this informal working group on Articles 6 and 7, Kazakhstan and Kiribati have implemented these provisions. They've taken a number of steps to try to consult with civil society and affected communities in how they will seek to develop the infrastructure and implement victim assistance. So one of the ways that they've done that is that there are these meetings of states in between kind of the very formal meetings of states parties that take place at the UN in Vienna and New York, that are kind of online meetings, essentially on Zoom, on Teams, where states get together and they talk about how are we going to take forward these different commitments. And in many treaty processes, these are closed just to states. But in the TPNW process, particularly in the work on Articles 6 and 7, there have been a number of these meetings that have been open to a list of affected community members who are interested in following them. The co-chairs of this working group have also circulated written documents to affected community members and to civil society for them to be able to review and provide written inputs. And this includes some of the work to develop the International Trust Fund. So as Gawker mentioned, there were discussions on this in between the different meetings of states parties. The co-chairs of the working group developed guidelines on what should be included in this trust fund. They sent out a survey with questions about how should the trust fund be structured. And these were open not just for states to input in, but also for civil society and affected communities to do so. The states also held a couple regional consultations with affected communities. So in addition to kind of the regular meetings with states, they held separate meetings, including translation for communities affected by nuclear weapons from the Pacific and the Central Asian region. There have also been opportunities not just for civil society and affected communities to listen kind of passively to the work, but actually to actively make presentations and provide recommendations on how they would like to see things moving forward. Within kind of the more formal settings of these meetings at the UN, there have been the opportunity for civil society and affected communities to make statements. And there have been a high number of civil society organizations participating in these meetings. And then finally, kind of in addition to a lot of the international work that's happening at the UN to implement this treaty, there also have been some engagements by affected states nationally with affected communities to discuss how they can improve their own domestic laws. And that's something my colleagues maybe can speak a bit more about in order to implement their international obligations to improve assistance that currently exists. So there have been a number of steps that have been taken by states to kind of make good on their promises to include affected communities and civil society within this treaty process. But of course, there's always more that can be done. And I think particularly given how high a bar is set by the treaty and by the Vienna Action Plan. We always have to call for states to do more and to improve how they include civil society and affected communities in this work. So, ICANN has a number of different recommendations for how that can be done. And a lot of it really comes down to kind of structurally preparing for the involvement of stakeholders. I think it sometimes comes down just to logistics, really, to giving advance notice of a meeting so that people can prepare and meaningfully engage. So a number of these are, not necessarily like revolutionary ideas, but I think just having an effective structure allows for better and more meaningful participation. So, first we call on states to develop and share a schedule of their work, including, when they will have different meetings to discuss these issues in advance, as well as which topics they plan to discuss at each meeting, so that people can prepare to be able to input meaningfully. Likewise, if there are kind of going to be separate consultations, which are welcome, particularly to get the input of civil society and affected communities, the purpose of those consultations should be clearly articulated in advance, and it should be clear how the input that is received from those consultations will be used within the implementation process. I think a really great commitment in the Vienna Action Plan is the commitment to take into account the different needs of people in affected communities and Indigenous peoples. And in relation to that, we recommend that in addition to allowing the normal meetings of states to be open to civil society, states can also consider holding a specific meeting or meetings which they can give more space to the contributions of others. So thinking about being adaptable in terms of the times of meeting and allowing for translation and other methods that can make it easier for a broader number of stakeholders to participate. They can be open to the different forms of contribution.
I'm asking you.
Oh, yes, that are preferred by different stakeholders and allow for that. Ensuring that meetings are accessible by using, where effective, hybrid formats of participation or virtual interventions. A really useful resource are the protocols for seeking nuclear truth and integrity developed by the Nuclear Truth Project, which has a lot of great recommendations as well. And then finally, working group co-chairs can consider extending formal invitations to Indigenous peoples to attend and participate in meetings, or holding separate consultations with Indigenous leaders. So in conclusion, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is really groundbreaking in terms of its commitments to the inclusion of civil society and affected communities, including particularly on the commitment to provide victim assistance and environmental remediation. And there have been many steps already taken to implement those commitments by states. And ICANN has a number of recommendations for how states can continue to work to share information about the work that they are doing and provide opportunities for meaningful consultation with civil society and affected communities in the lead up to the first review conference at the end of next year.
Yep, perfect. Thank you so much. I think your remarks very much highlight the active involvement of civil society within TPNW frameworks, which is good, but there are still ways to grow. And to continue on that note, I'm going to present our third speaker, Veronique Christery. She's the Senior Arms Advisor for the International Committee of the Red Cross to the UN. Since 1997, she develops laws regulating the use of weapons and new technologies. She negotiated the TPNW. She serves as an ambassador on the Advisory Council of the Albright Institute. She has served as an inspiration for a theater play, A Family Business Talking About the Fire by Christ Thorpe, and received in 2024 an APF Woman Waging Peace Award. She's the proud mother of 4 children. And Ms. Christery will share ICRC's perspective on victim assistance and environmental remediation from a humanitarian standpoint. She's joining us online. Ms. Christery, please, the floor is yours. We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Oh.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you very much. I'm truly delighted to be with you. I wish I could be also in person, but unfortunately I'm far away. And thank you, Adia and Kazakh Youth Initiative for Nuclear Justice for organizing this event and inviting the ICRC to be able to bring the ICRC perspective. Last year, I went in Astana, Kazakhstan, to attend the Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone conference, and I had the opportunity to meet some of you, as well as other survivors of nuclear tests in semi-palatines and around the globe. And I was very moved by all the testimonies and discussion, and I really want you to be reassured that you are in my mind and our thought when we are in meetings at the UN fighting for the inclusion of the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons and victim assistance in debates and negotiation. And if I may say, it's more and more difficult in the current environment to bring the humanitarian perspective of this inhumane weapon. I think that it's even more important this day to continue to fight for better understanding of the impact of this weapon. I will devote my presentation in three parts. Why it is so important to focus on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, what the ICRC is doing to contribute to the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons, and what next. Just a few words on background. The ICRC was founded by Henri Dunant in 1863. It's an independent, neutral humanitarian organization which ensures protection and assistance for victims of armed conflict and other situations of violence. And at the same time, and I think that it's perhaps the part that we know less, the ICRC promotes respect for international humanitarian law and the implementation of IHL as its guardian. It also developed with states new treaty that regulates and prohibits certain weapons and methods of means of warfare. And I would like to stress on a very important point. When the ICRC is proposing the development of new instrument on weapon, it's because we have witnessed firsthand the impact of this weapon with huge humanitarian impact like mines, cluster munition, chemical weapon, as well as nuclear weapon. It is what it is. It is called humanitarian disarmament. This is a people-centered approach to security. And it's important to say that the ICRC witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of nuclear weapons in 1945. Our colleague, including Dr. Marcel Junot, arrived in Hiroshima just after the nuclear bombing, and he was one of the first foreigners to witness and was one of the first doctor on the site to witness the impact of this weapon. And just to have an idea, some of the first picture that the Americans saw of the impact of this weapon were provided by the picture taken by Dr. Marcel Junot, who went to the American forces and to show them the impact of this weapon. With doctors and nurses, the Japanese Red Cross, they try in near impossible condition to assist the dying and injured. I mean, hospitals were in ruin. There were no medicine, no bandage, no blood transfusion. And at the beginning, they really never had seen something like that. They thought that it was really a supernatural power, which in fact is it. Out of 1,000 patients who had taken refuge to the Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital on the first day, 600 rapidly died. Dr. Juno noted the consequences of the bomb of Hiroshima in his medical report. Out of 300 doctors, 270 died or were injured, and 90% of nurses were killed. His conclusion was clear: there is no place for this weapon in our world. And so the ICRC made the first call to ban this weapon in 1945. Needless to say that we were not very successful, but we pursue our effort until 2017 when we negotiated the TPNW, which is truly an historic achievement. And I think that it's important to stress that even when there are not nuclear weapon states party to this treaty, in terms of international law and rules and principle of humanity, it's really an historic achievement, and we should not underestimate it. Why it is important to focus on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons? Because they are the benchmark against which the moral, ethical, and legal acceptability of a weapon is to be judged. Moreover, the use or threat of use of nuclear weapon is abhorrent to the principle of humanity and dictate of public conscience. The conflict in Ukraine, for example, and the alarming risk of use of nuclear weapon these days ask all of us to ponder and to act, and that's why it's so important to refocus the whole debate on nuclear weapon around their impact on people and on the environment. The existence of nuclear weapons poses some of the most profound questions about the extent of human suffering we are willing to inflict or permit in war. We cannot allow a repetition of the dark part of our past. We owe it to the survivor, the Bakusha, and all those affected by nuclear tests to ensure that the horror they suffer and are still suffering today are never repeated. The ICRC message, therefore, is clear, and we have been very outspoken. What we cannot prepare for, what we cannot respond to, we must prevent. In 2020, the ICRC and the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society convened an expert meeting on the humanitarian impact and risk of use of nuclear weapons with around 45 states and scientific experts. And among the key findings was that there is no state or international body that could address the immediate humanitarian emergency, nor the long-term consequences of a nuclear weapon detonation, nor provide appropriate assistance to those affected. And in 2024, the ICRC also organized in Brussels and in Oslo the Nuke Expo with many partners. It's a scientific expo on the risk and impact of nuclear weapons to raise awareness and to discuss how to address this issue. More than 1,000 people attended these two events, and we hope to bring the Nuke Expo on the margin of the NPT review conference to continue to discuss the risk and impact of this weapon. What the ICRC is doing to contribute to the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. As I mentioned, the ICRC made the first call to ban nuclear weapons in 1945, and we supported states to negotiate the TPNW. We participated actively in the negotiation and the adoption of the entry into force and the implementation, and also on the universalization of the treaty. And I think that it's very important to focus on victim assistance and environmental remediation, but also to work on the universalization of this treaty, because the more states are not joining, the less risk there is that there will be a humanitarian catastrophe. To support state, we just published a briefing note of 20 pages, and it's rather a very legal paper on victim assistance and environmental remediation to assist states, but also civil society and the scientific community to address victim assistance and environmental remediation in a comprehensive and holistic approach. As mentioned by Gokar and Älisher, Articles 6 and 7 are key to achieving the treaty humanitarian objective, and they are the core of the TPNW. They establish measures for alleviating the harm caused by nuclear weapons, which can be implemented in a cooperative manner by states party to the treaty, even before the adherence of nuclear weapon possessor states. The TPNW, in a way, is the first multilateral treaty to establish such obligation for weapon of mass destruction, and that's why it's a very important. They are very important article. The ICRC is supporting the creation of a trust fund, but we, from our perspective, it's up to states and to decide how it's created. And for the ICRC, we will participate in the trust fund, but we also have to be mindful that we might have a conflict of interest if some projects will be implemented by Red Cross and Red Crescent Society. So we don't want to have to be perceived as pushing one side versus the other one. So we will rather want to have a more advisory expertise role,
Sorry,
don't want.
I'm kindly asking you to wrap up. Thank you. Hope for your understanding.
Yeah. So what next? I just wanted to mention that 2026 will be very important with the NPT review conference and the first review conference of the TPNW, and that we all work together and to make progress toward the elimination of nuclear weapons. So let's continue to negotiate for humanity, because, as you said, there is no alternative to peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So yes, we can see that ICRC plays a huge role in the TPNW framework as well. We have, again, like this global civil society organizations, but at the same time, we also have bottom-up perspectives coming from the affected communities, coming from the affected states. And I'm going to present our fourth speaker, who is Benedict Kabua-Madison, joining us online. He's the executive director of the Marshallese Educational Initiative, a nonprofit organization based in Arkansas, where the highest concentration of Marshallese lives outside of the Marshall Islands. Born in Majuro Atoll, Madison left his low-lying atoll nation and migrated to the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas with his parents and siblings in 2001. His work at MEI, the initiative, includes leading efforts to raise awareness on the biological, ecological, cultural consequences of the nuclear testing and legacy on his homeland and of other frontline communities. Benedict has spoken at conferences, events in the US and internationally, and has addressed the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of civil society and frontline communities. And Benedict is here with us to reflect on Marshallese experience and MEI's engagement with the ongoing discussions related to the trust fund within TPNW. Benedict, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adia, and to all the organizers for this opportunity. It is a pleasure to be with you all today and to participate on this panel. So it has been emphasized repeatedly that nuclear weapons do not contribute to peace and security in our world. Instead, these destructive devices are engineered as tools of terror designed to promote hatred and create division among nations and peoples. Rather than promote peace, they undermine global stability by instilling mistrust. The threat nuclear weapons pose extends far beyond their immediate destructive capability. They leave a legacy of devastation that lasts for generations. It is necessary to understand this legacy and its ongoing consequences. Without this knowledge, one cannot truly advocate for disarmament or pursue a future defined by cooperation and peace. The Marshall Islands exemplified the lasting impact of nuclear weapons testing, with the US conducting 67 large-scale detonations. These tests have led to higher cancer rates and increased diabetes due to forced relocations and the destruction of traditional food sources. Additionally, they have caused long-term ecological damage and contamination of our lands and waters. Despite this evident toll in our community, the US ignores its moral responsibilities toward the Marshallese people. Rather than confronting the consequences of its nuclear program, it has largely neglected our plight, leaving us to grapple with the aftermath of decisions made without our consent. This purposeful oversight disregards the human rights of the Marshallese people and is a grave injustice. From 1945 to 1992, the cumulative yield of US nuclear weapons tests reached an astonishing 179 megatons. Notably, 108 megatons of this total were produced in tests conducted in the Marshall Islands. These are hard and known facts, yet the United States refuses to adequately acknowledge them. The financial support it does lend is limited to those it identifies as nuclear affected. Where is the support for those who suffer generational effects of radiation exposure, or for environmental damages, or for the cultural genocide that resulted from these explosions? The US government claims that the Compact of Free Association, a bilateral agreement between the Marshall Islands and the US, is the answer to the permanent problems it created. This is not the case. The US argues that it provides just and adequate compensation to the government of the Marshall Islands. In reality, this is just a fraction of the true cost of damages. Similarly, it represents but a fraction of what the US spends to maintain and now increase its nuclear arsenal. It also does not take into account the immense cost of intergenerational health issues and related concerns in communities within the US borders where mining, milling, and transport of radioactive materials take place, or where nuclear waste is stored and maintained. For the Marshall Islands, there continues to be a need for a comprehensive, strategic approach to address the biological, ecological, and cultural effects of nuclear colonialism for today's generation and future generations. These complex issues require significant investment without conditions that could undermine the full realization of justice and healing for the Marshallese people with respect to our human rights and national sovereignty. I recognize that the United States is not the sole party responsible for this troubling legacy. In 1947, just a year after the US began testing nuclear weapons at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, the United Nations placed the Marshallese people and our islands under US control as a strategic trust for military purposes. Excuse me. This was done without our consent. This decision paved the way for nuclear experimentation. The Marshall Islands are waiting for the United Nations to address this shared legacy, including through the TPNW. Discussions have been held regarding the establishment of an international trust fund, as others have explained, and we need to resume those discussions. It is imperative that the state parties responsible for Article 6 and 7 of the TPNW continue to deepen their consultations with nuclear frontline communities. These impacted populations must have their voices heard and be included throughout the decision-making process and after the creation of a trust fund. By engaging in meaningful dialogue with affected communities, state parties can better shape the trust fund's objectives and mechanisms. This collaboration promotes transparency and accountability and ensures the trust fund addresses the real challenges faced by those enduring the impacts of nuclear harm. It is also important to acknowledge that the Marshall Islands has not yet signed or ratified the treaty. Leadership within the Marshall Islands continues to push for the US to accept its responsibility. Regardless, Marshallese voices must be heard in international efforts to ensure remediation. In the case of the Marshallese people, the trust fund can help address our nuclear legacy by providing funding that will address biological, ecological, and cultural consequences of the nuclear testing legacy. It must be managed by and for nuclear affected communities and be sustainable. Ways this can be accomplished are through the creation of world-class health and research institutes to screen and treat patients with cancer and other nuclear-related illnesses, such as diabetes and heart disease. These institutes should treat Marshallese both on the home islands and in the diaspora. These institutes must be managed by civil society organizations composed of nuclear frontline communities that are actively engaged in nuclear disarmament, provide grassroots community support, and actively support the TPNW. The trust fund could also be used to create educational institutions where frontline community members can attend to become scientists, engineers, teachers, and other professionals who can help confront the ongoing health, environmental, economic, and cultural impacts of nuclear development. These are among the many efforts the trust fund should consider. Of course, the Marshall Islands will continue to demand that the United States provide adequate support for victims' assistance and environmental remediation. For the Marshall Islands, these efforts could help reduce or ultimately reverse migration to the United States. According to the latest census, more Marshallese reside outside of the Marshall Islands than live on our home islands. Many individuals with the skills and talents necessary for developing the country are leaving in search of opportunities that are either scarce or non-existent at home. Investing trust fund monies in ways that help build infrastructure could counter the brain drain in the Marshall Islands and any other frontline communities facing the same situation. Ultimately, the trust fund should be used to foster strong, resilient communities through advanced healthcare, quality education, employment opportunities, and other initiatives that address ongoing challenges for frontline communities while investing in them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Benedict, for sharing the Marshallese experiences and grievances with the nuclear tests, but also the set of recommendations that you have, which is very comprehensive. Thank you so much. We're going forward with our next speaker, my dear friend, Älisher Khassengaliyev. Älisher is an independent researcher in social studies and international relations, operations coordinator at the Youth for TPNW, and co-founder of the Steppe Organization for Peace, so we are colleagues. His work focuses on nuclear justice, disarmament, human security, and sustainable development. He has extensive experience in research and advocacy, contributing to evidence-based policymaking and youth engagement to promote inclusive, justice-oriented approaches to global peace and security. And Älisher will offer insights on trust fund as well, from a civil society and survivor-centered advocacy perspective, drawing on our work in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I guess I want to start with just a short historical note. So as we saw in the beginning, during the screening of the short film by Zhanana Kurmasheva, Atomic Secrets, from 1949 until 1991, Soviet Union conducted over 450 nuclear tests on the territory of the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, which is located on the northeastern side of Kazakhstan, northeastern part of Kazakhstan, very close to the city of Semey, and dozens of villages and towns around the 18,000 square kilometers that were approximately the territory of the Semipalatinsk nuclear testing site. Also, Soviet Union conducted on the territory of the Semipalatinsk testing site the atmospheric tests, so the test on the air, and underground tests. So the tests, nuclear tests, the test of nuclear weapons in Semey, they had consequences on the soil, on the environment, and on the people of surrounding territories and surrounding towns and villages. But fortunately, on August 29th, 1991, Kazakhstan officially closed the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. And actually next year in 2026, we will mark 35th anniversary of the closure of the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. But the decision to close the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site did not appear overnight or easily. The road to closure was paved by the Nevada Semey movement, the largest anti-nuclear movement in Kazakhstan's history. The courage of affected communities, the mobilization of the whole Kazakh society, and solidarity with communities in the United States and beyond showed that Kazakhstan had its own voice. This mobilization was closely tied also to Kazakhstan's path to independence the same year in the 1991, and showed that our society was ready to defend its land and protect the lives of its citizens. So Nevada Semey became the first formally registered NGO in independent Kazakhstan. And the anti-nuclear consensus in the society that emerged from Semey has since shaped our foreign policy, our national stance on disarmament and arms control. The polygon issue also stood at the origins of our social policy. In the 1992, before Kazakhstan even had its own currency, the state adopted the law on social protection of citizens affected by nuclear tests at the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. It created a framework for recognition, benefits, and payments, and also signaled a commitment to take responsibility for nuclear harm within our very young at the moment country. Yet, here we are in 2025, almost 35 years after closure and 33 years after the adoption of the law. And as we saw in the film in the beginning, and from our work today as an activist in civil society, many problems unfortunately remain unresolved. From our research and community work, several structural barriers are very clear. First and foremost is eligibility to official recognition as a survivor within Kazakhstan's legislation. It remains tied mainly to residence in specific zones in a fixed historical period. It also excludes many exposed people and their descendants, so new generations of survivors, so young people, children that are already a part of the third and fourth generation of affected communities. Governance around victim assistance and environmental remediation within Kazakhstan is very fragmented, with responsibilities spread across different ministries and agencies. And participation in shaping these policies by affected communities and civil society, unfortunately, is largely just advisory. Survivors and local organizations are consulted, and it's true, it's a fact, but rarely empowered to shape policies within the framework. And not only policies, but also budgets and also monitor the policies that kind of shape their social protection and healthcare. Also, programs tend to prioritize capital-intensive and symbolic projects and payments over sustained services such as healthcare, psychosocial support, legal assistance, and livelihood opportunities. As mentioned by Benedict, and I agree with him that it's because it's the same issue in Kazakhstan. But what we are trying to do as a civil society right now to tackle these problems. So as I said in the beginning, this year, the Steppe Organization for Peace joined a new working group on the consequences of nuclear testing under the Ministry of Ecology and Natural Resources. The working group has developed two main products, already developed, a package of amendments to the 1992 law on social protection of affected community, which remains the core of victim assistance legislation in Kazakhstan, and draft sustainable development programs for the affected regions as a long-term framework for social and economic transformation of affected regions. For STOP, a central task in this process has been to connect these domestic developments with Kazakhstan's obligations under the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, in particular Article 6 and 7. and with the emerging design of the TPNW International Trust Fund. We, as an organization, prepared analysis on how the reforms under the discussion can be understood as part of implementing our humanitarian commitments on victim assistance and environmental remediation. In doing so, we saw also a broader pattern together with my colleague Adia. On the one hand, Kazakhstan is recognized as a champion of nuclear disarmament, and it's not a secret for many of our colleagues, and it's mentioned by Gauhar and Veronique. We are very committed. But unfortunately, on the other hand, in affected communities, assistance remains incomplete, fragmented, and often difficult to access. We describe this as a leadership delivery gap. Strong leadership in international disarmament diplomacy combined with much weaker delivery of rights and services at home. And actually, and unfortunately again, past national programs and attempts to solve the polygon problem show the same pattern. What does this mean for our discussion today around the TPNW International Trust Fund? That we are very hopeful as an affected state party that it will be at some point operationalized. First, for me, the main lesson is very straightforward. If the trust fund is designed only as a diplomatic success for Kazakhstan, right, without mechanisms that genuinely close the leadership delivery gap, it risks repeating the shortcomings of previous efforts. To avoid this, we kind of developed three elements that we think are very crucial in this regard. So first, governance of the trust fund must embed affected communities and civil society from outset. Communities, including women, youth, and indigenous peoples, should not only be consulted, as we see, unfortunately, today within the TPNW framework. They should hold formal, resourced roles in the fund's governing and advisory bodies, so that priorities, eligibility criteria, and monitoring frameworks reflect lived experiences of affected communities. Second, access pathways must reflect real life, not just ideal bureaucracy system. Experience from Semey and other affected regions shows that people struggle most at the entry points of the victim assistance. Documentation requirements, distance, digital exclusion, and lack of support in navigating institutions. The fund should therefore support trusted local intermediaries, maybe community organizations or some NGOs that could support the connection or bridge the gap between institutions and affected communities. Third, the fund should clearly prioritize long-term, person-centered services over purely capital-intensive projects that we see right now. While infrastructure, of course, can be necessary in some cases, Kazakhstan's experience suggests that investments in human capital, so healthcare, psychosocial support, social work, education, and community-led monitoring deliver more sustainable improvements for affected people. Any investment in buildings or equipment should be directly linked to measurable benefits for survivors. So across all three elements, strong transparency and accountability are very essential. But publicly accessible information on where resources go, who benefits, and how grievances are addressed is very important. So as we approach the 35th anniversary of the polygon's closure, we have a very straightforward and clear choice. We can continue as a Kazakh civil society, first and foremost. We can continue to celebrate our disarmament leadership, quote unquote, while allowing the gap between the leadership and delivery to persist within our country. Or we can use tools such as the TPNW and hopefully TPNW International Trust Fund to align our international commitments with concrete, measurable improvements in the lives of those who still live with nuclear harm. For my generation, for young people in Kazakhstan, and this in personal note, being just from a country that is a leader in disarmament means not only closing test sites and removing warheads, but also ensuring that our people in remote villages does not have to fight the archives to prove her exposure, and that her grandchildren are recognized in law, not just in commemorative speeches by our leaders. If we design the trust fund with the perspective in mind, grounded in our history, informed with evidence and centered on affected communities' perspective, then we mark the 40th anniversary of the closure of the Semipalatinsk testing site with, I believe, much better condition of victim assistance and environmental remediation, and just not only with symbolic achievements that we already have, but with genuine progress in justice, care, and remediation.
Thank you so much, Älisher. This means a lot for us to stay critical, because we surely need to cherish our achievements, but also we need to foresee what ways, what things we should also prioritize, what problems still remain. We don't have much time for the Q&A session. We actually don't have any time, but I would like to take only one question probably from the audience. Please introduce yourself and your question. Maybe comments. Yes, sure. Okay, perfect. I think this is very much a heavy panel for people maybe not from the disarmament field, and even for people from the disarmament field, but just like, I think this was still very insightful. Sure, thank you.
Okay, so my friend and I are both part of the human rights program here at Vienna, and we've been going over treaty law as well. I know that Ms. Khakhar spoke a little bit about the tension between outside or non-signatory parties funding the trust fund, and Ms. Suri, she also mentioned that this treaty should be something universal, or they should aim towards universality. However, I mean, I'm not super familiar with the treaty myself, but I think Article 16 prohibits, for example, reservations to the treaty. How does this align with this tension, for example, with countries that do have nuclear arsenals, where NATO countries, for example, that are aligned with those countries, and participation and universality in terms of this treaty? That was my question, I guess. And if that does, and obviously it's not negotiable as part of the treaty, what other mechanisms would you propose in your mind to bring those countries on board, provide for the trust fund in a safe way?
Thank you. That's also a heavy question. Yeah, so who are you addressing the core question to? I'm not sure if the panelists from the Zoom could hear the question though. Okay, Älisher.
I'm happy to address that. Others can also. But just because, as I mentioned, a lot of ICANN's work is to get more countries to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and that includes nuclear armed states and these so-called nuclear umbrella states, so states that are in kind of nuclear alliances with other states, or even that actually have other countries' nuclear weapons on their territory, which is the case for several European countries, actually. And, you know, we see that there should be no reason why those countries should not join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. There are many reasons for this. You know, one is the risk that nuclear weapons pose to all countries as long as they exist. Another, particularly for many European states or democratic states, is that, you know, there are public opinion polls showing public support for joining the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So it's actually quite an anti-democratic stance that countries like Germany, France, the US have actually not joined this treaty, when we know that public opinion is in support of it. So I guess you can't really expect another answer from me than those countries should join the treaty and then be able to not only eliminate the risk that nuclear weapons pose in the world for the future, but also address the legacy of harm they have posed in the past.
Thank you. Is there anything that we can address as well? If this is it, then we're going to close the panel. I think these are, no matter what is happening in the world, in the disarmament field as well, like all of the issues that are now, being exacerbated very much, but we still are very hopeful, and we expect a lot actually from the review conference in upcoming year, and we believe to hear some of the cohesive responses from the state parties on what work has been done and what is there to be done. Yes, thank you so much for this. We are going to have a coffee break until 10, 15 minutes?
10.
Okay, 10 minutes. So yes, see you in 10 minutes.
Yeah, my name is Zhebek Tokhtash. I am a program officer at Friedrich-Ebert Foundation Kazakhstan, and as well as a founding member of Steppe Organization for Peace, Kazakh Youth Initiative for Nuclear Justice. And I'll be moderating our second panel that will be focusing on youth perspectives and also on intersectional approaches in disarmament field. So, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. And it's actually a pleasure to be here with all of you, and a warm thank you to all our colleagues who made this event happen today, and also for Dialogbüro for hosting us today here at the office. And it is important for us as Youth Initiative and also from people coming from Kazakhstan to have this conversation on nuclear justice, human security, and lived experiences in Vienna, where discussions are usually or often disconnected with realities on the ground. And I'm really glad we could make this event happen today. Our first panel offered very valuable perspectives on the TPNW Trust Fund and how to center affected communities in disarmament initiatives. Now, building on that foundation, panel 2 will shift focus towards the future, specifically how youth, justice, and intersectionality are reshaping disarmament efforts. And in other words, we're zooming in on the human side of security, how young people can bridge the gap between high-level commitments that states or international organizations that were present also here today and real human security outcomes. So as both a representative of FES Kazakhstan and STOP, I want to share why the themes of youth leadership, justice, and intersectionality are so vital to our work. Working in Kazakhstan, in a country deeply wounded by the Soviet nuclear program, and where we closely work with the affected community, we strongly believe in bottom-up approaches that Adia, our previous moderator, already mentioned in the first panel, and which means listening to survivors, to their voices, to local leaders and young activists on the ground, and letting their experiences to guide the agenda. And we strongly believe then that when solutions are co-created from the ground up, they are more sustainable and more just. And at uncertain and unstable, maybe scary for some of us, times like this, with ongoing wars and conflicts and global nuclear rhetoric, when the disarmament field is at risk, we as a youth organization working in this field also believe in intersectionality, and that intersectionality could be the bridge that breaks the silos in disarmament. By embracing intersectionality, we can see nuclear weapons and security issues more holistically. We begin to connect disarmament to broader goals like climate action, like a clean environment, human rights, and sustainable development. So as we kick off this panel, I encourage all of us to stay open and curious. Before we start the panel, I just want to share a quick update. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Valentina Urtan, won't be able to join us today. Due to the ongoing Russian airstrikes on Ukraine, there are power outages in Kiev, and she lost connection and she won't be able to join online. Actually, we were planning to have Valentina in person here. We invited her to Vienna, but also, unfortunately, due to the constant airstrikes, the security situations on the borders are also very tense, and she couldn't make it here both in person and also she couldn't join online, which we were just informed before the beginning of the panel. And yeah, we hoped to find another way to bring her voice into the space soon. Yeah, and Valentina sends her apologies, but we also stay hopeful for the peace in Ukraine very soon. So yeah, and I want to introduce our panelists today. So first, we'll start with my teammate, STOP teammate and our previous moderator of the panel, Adi Ahmer, executive team member on the Steppe Organization for Peace. I'll start with the introduction of each panelist, and then they'll start with their speeches. Adia is an emerging expert in nuclear politics and social justice, She is pursuing her master's degree in political science and international relations in Nazarbayev University, Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. She is also a co-founding member of Steppe Organization for Peace, Kazakh Youth Initiative for Nuclear Justice. Her research interests include victim assistance and environmental remediation in nuclear-affected communities, energy diplomacy, and women's rights movements. More broadly, she is committed to justice-oriented approaches in both research and advocacy. Then we'll move to Nazirke Kanatbekova, a PhD student in the Faculty of Philological and Cultural Studies at the University of Vienna, and a pre-doctoral researcher at the Cluster of Excellence Eurasian Transformations. She's originally from Simei, a city deeply shaped by the legacy of nearby Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. This personal connection is central to her PhD research, which focuses on how people remember and live with the consequences of nuclear testing. She is particularly interested in how communities engage with this legacy through cultural narratives, memorialization practices, and creative expressions. More broadly, her work is informed by nuclear cultural heritage and environmental humanities. And last but not least, we have Vanda Praskova. Vanda is a sustainable security expert from Czech Republic, specializing in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. She has worked and collaborated with civil society organizations, academia, think tanks, and intergovernmental institutions, including the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, and the United Nations, and alumna of UNODA's Leaders for Tomorrow and the OSCE Scholarship for Peace and Security. She is currently a CTBTO Research Fellow. Thank you for all our amazing women experts in this field joining our panel today. I'll give the floor to Adia, who will kick off our panel by sharing how youth participation actually works in disarmament field, based on your experience in STOP.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for your introduction. So hello again. I would like to start from this thing. So this year we mark our second birthday of our youth initiative. And I can say with confidence that we've grown up, and we've grown up a lot. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So over the past years, we have become knowledge-producing actors in nuclear justice. At the third meeting of state parties, we already talked about it in the first panel. We presented our working paper on the governance of the trust fund, and also we had our side event there. Over the summer, we developed and delivered policy briefs and recommendations for our state actors and non-state actors as well back in Kazakhstan. And we also began our huge project, which we're very much proud of, community needs-based assessment across all nuclear-affected regions. We visited towns, we visited villages, spoke to survivors, local leaders, documented their priorities, and we worked on how to translate their experiences into policy languages so that they reach not only like Kazakhstani stakeholders, but also international audiences. And because of this work, we've grown up into this network of both state and non-state actors. We have experts, survivors, civil society partners, young professionals, and all are committed, some are less, some are more, to survivor-centered advocacy. And here I would like to emphasize that we may be young, but we are not youth experts. We are experts, and that's it. It doesn't mean that the age is not important. Well, yes, of course, my age informs the opportunities and access that I have, the communities I'm connected to, and what I feel about what's happening now in the world, back at home, and my feelings about the future. But when I see them in these policy tables or speak at events, there should not be, and I hope there's not, a hierarchy of whose expertise matters more. Our contributions should be judged by their substance, not by birth year. And this brings me to the central topic of my today's speech, is the difference between symbolic and substantive youth participation. Symbolic participation is when youth are invited to stand on stage, to speak briefly, to take group photos, often in the name of inclusivity, and without having the power or resources to define decisions. Symbolic participation recognizes youth presence, but not youth agency. Substantive participation is different, in contrast. It means that youth are involved in agenda setting, in policy development, long-term research, meaningful consultations with communities. It means that our work is resourced, recognized, and embedded into institutional processes. Substantive youth participation is when ministries that you present your recommendations for free, basically, they call you back after a meeting. When your recommendations are taken into account, when communities hear you, trust you, and invite you back, when your work actually shapes what the next year of implementation actually looks like. And our work in STOP is built around the idea of substance. When we speak about youth activism in nuclear affected communities, we're talking about not only awareness raising or creative storytelling, but these are very important, both awareness work and the storytelling techniques and all of the work that's been going on in disarmament. But we're also talking about grounding youth advocacy into the lived realities of people who have survived and who are still struggling with the effects of the nuclear testing. It's health impacts, environmental degradation, socioeconomic marginalization, emotional trauma that is present still. And here I would like to highlight some principles in survivor-centered advocacy that we find important and which resemble also the Nuclear Tooth Project protocols. First one is surely listening before speaking, listening to those people who have their stories and whose stories we are also respecting and sharing. Secondly, is connecting local needs with international commitments. Nuclear affected communities shouldn't have to navigate technical UN language. We can be there as advocates, at least in our initiative. Thirdly, making sure that youth involvement strengthens but not replaces community voices. Substantive youth participation should amplify survivors but not overshadow them. And TPNW is one of those disarmament spaces that explicitly recognizes gender and age-sensitive approaches, which is good. And this is why, compared to other like NPT framework, TPNW community feels more diverse and more open to youth. And when you go to these places like MSP, you can actually see lots of youth there organizing their own events, participating in the events. But representation is only the first step. The real challenge and the real opportunity is to ensure that youth participation becomes structural but not occasional, substantive, not symbolic. And this is what we do in STOP. And as we enter our third year now of existence, this is our commitment to continue building evidence, to stand alongside affected communities, and to make sure that youth engagement in nuclear justice is not just visible, but also meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adia, for such a critical answer on how to ensure youth participation in the disarmament field and how to make it more substantive rather than symbolic. And I think it's, and thank you for grounding us, like how to, the panel overall, kicking off the panel to continue this discussion on intersectionalism, intersectionality in this field. And now I would like to give the floor to Nazirke, who will reflect on how we can better connect academic research with civil society work and how to turn high-level principles into practical and community-focused actions.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's such an honor to be part of this conversation, and I hope you're all not tired yet. Just bear with me. So my contribution today focuses on how academic research, especially research grounded on the people's narratives, can help to bridge the gap between the high-level disarmament principles and the practical work happening on the ground. I came to these topics from my PhD research on the lived experiences and memory transmission of people related to Kazakhstan's nuclear past. I study how people living around the testing site narrate their experiences, how the memories are passed across generations, and how do communities today engage with the official memory museums, memorials, or the unofficial ones, which are oral histories, everyday practices, and creative expressions. So why do lived experience and memory matter for disarmament? When we talk about disarmament at the level of global commitments, policies often treat nuclear violence as something historical, exceptional, or contained. But for many communities all around the world, these are the afterlives that matter. People are living in the places where nuclear weapons and nuclear fallouts happened. And sometimes for some people, for some policymakers, it's so difficult to grasp. So the research would help to illuminate this continuity. The radiation may not be visible, but the memories, anxieties, and embodied consequences of it are still very much present. What this tells us is that Disarmament should not be separated from the actual lived human experience of nuclear harm. Policies must be informed not only by the statistics, risk, and impact assessment, but also by the stories of people telling how the testing shaped their families, their lands, and their sense of security. Much of the global discourse still frame affected communities in a passive terms. They would often use statements such as, we are giving the voice for the victims. They would use words such as test subjects or data points, often forgetting that they're working with actual people, and people are not just the passive recipients of whatever happened to them, but they are also the active meaning makers. They're also the ones who have their own agency. And the research would help, so the research focused on the narratives would help to look closely to what's happening. When you listen carefully for the people's narratives, you would see that there is much more going on. You can see people who navigate the risk and uncertainty every day. You can see people who create their own understandings and the explanations of what happened. For example, during my field work, there are going to be people who would tell me insane stories about what radiation is. They would, for example, tell me that they look so young and they look so fresh because they have a little bit of radiation happening in the region. You would also see that people actively reinterpret the past and they guide their present decisions based on that. And this is all not just there. It's not just emotional, anecdotal, or just the stories that happened. We are not playing there with whoever has the saddest story or whoever has the incredible story about radiation. This all has the practical implications. Lived experience should be seen as something analytical because it can reveal the gaps in the state reporting. It can expose contradictions in official narratives. It can also identify how this community-centered approach we're talking should look like. And civil society organizations, they are already doing crucial work. They are raising awareness, they're advocating for a survivor-centered approach. They are also demanding for accountability. And academia can support this in several ways. First of all, it can provide some in-depth context because not all harm is material. Some are symbolic, psychological, intergenerational, and what scholars call is intersectional harm, because the harm is happening in multiple layers. There is economic degradation, there is environment, there is socioeconomic, there is everything happening at the same time. So research can help to articulate these complexities and can change the policy conversations, basically. Academia can also help to document often dismissed, overlooked voices, particularly those stories that are not appeared in official archives. Women, rural communities, caregivers, they're often historically dismissed as, their experiences historically dismissed as something unscientific or something irrelevant to this whole discourse of disarmament, but it's not. Academia can also help to challenge dominant narratives. For example, what is security and what is technical achievement? And we can talk a lot about what is knowledge and what counts as knowledge in disarmament or not. Academia can help at least try to answer that questions in a more humanitarian, I hope, way. And finally, academia can create more accessible knowledge. We all know that the academia is very elitist. The researcher, like all the research that is done should not be stayed only in the journals, basically. It should be translated in the more accessible formats, like exhibitions, the collaborative works that we are doing right now, or some educational material. But also, I think my final point here is to think of this knowledge creation from the research side is seeing it as a co-creation, because we are not the ones who are trying to build this knowledge hierarchy. We are the ones who try to co-search for the knowledge, and I think that's important for the disarmament, just to give the community knowledge, the expertise it's deserving for so many years.
Thank you so much, Nazirke. I think you touched very important question in the community, especially like in disarmament field when we work with the affected communities. In our work, we also try to co-design our solutions together with community members, not to impose our solutions or decision makers' solutions on them, because we shouldn't perceive them only as like passive actors of this research we do or the decisions we do, but like active co-designers and co-creators. And I think it is very great to have this new generation of researchers who actually think about it and like critically look at their work and how to make it more ethically and morally right. Yes, thank you very much. And now we will move to our last but not the least speaker, Wanda Praskova, who will discuss how to bring intersectional approaches into global disarmament practice and what concrete actions can help make our work more inclusive and more grounded. So Wanda, voice yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. You know, I'm very lucky to wear many different hats within the disarmament space. And it often comes with these like pre-written talking points and very like institutional wordings and things to say. So this is a very exciting evening for me that I get to speak to you from the bottom of my heart. So if I'm too harsh on certain things, you know, that's just me. Anyway, so I drafted some just some pointers that I wanted to mention. It's a huge topic. Not sure if we can fit it in within 5 to 7 minutes, but let me try. So zooming out a little bit beyond abolition, if I asked you to close your eyes and imagine yourself in your community and ask yourself what makes you feel safe and what makes you feel secure. If we then opened our eyes and actually thought about what we bring to the room, I would bet that each and every one of us would give a different answer. Whether it is, you know, being able to walk alone at night or being able to provide food for our families or being able to work in a safe environment or being safe from any environmental disasters, for example. These answers would be so diverse, but I think it's so important to realize this because it underscores that peace and security is incredibly intersectional. We cannot be talking about disarmament and forget about the environment. We cannot be talking about disarmament and forget about gender injustice. We cannot talk about disarmament and forget the whole sustainable development framework. So I really think it's so important and crucial, and thank you again to the organizers for bringing these issues together and for us to be able to have this conversation. Okay, I'll speed up a little bit because I know that the Q&A and the conversation is the best part about this. Adia has already mentioned the importance of you know, the shift from symbolic to substantive participation of youth engagement in disarmament and all of security spaces. But I really want to echo how important that is. I started in the field, well, it's been a while, but so oftentimes I would be the only youth or the only woman, the only one from Europe within the high-level room. And that's, of course, taking into consideration that I was one of those privileged who, you know, could afford to fly to the States or had the education to be able to prove myself to enter those spaces in the first place. And those are really structural barriers that we're dealing with. And you know, it goes to even unpaid internships at the UN and then who gets to do them. So those are really practical lived obstacles. Another one I wanted to underscore, which has also been mentioned, is that when we talk about youth or when youth is being talked about, it's often one group where we say, oh, those youth. But we so often forget that youth is not one homogeneous group. It's the most diverse group of people on this planet. So yeah, if institutions engage in people without designing for those really different intersections, we're just reproducing the same inequalities just on a younger level. And I see that as hugely problematic. Younger generations also bring different perspectives and different whole lenses to the table. I mean, especially all of us who were born after Cold War, for example. We're not as weighted down by what has happened, but we're more eager. You know, we still can hold history accountable. We still respect history, but we're not trapped by it. And I think that's so important in the current diplomatic arena, especially in 2025. You know, it's a depressing, very sad space on so many different accounts. But we also have to remember, you know, talking about history, that disarmament and one of the most robust disarmament and security tools have emerged from some of the lowest points in our history. If we think about the UN, that's emerged from the massive disaster that was World War II, right? If we think about START treaty between the US and Russia, which is limiting the number of nuclear weapons that we have, that came after the Cold War, after the many so almost disasters that we've seen. So whenever we think, or people come to us and say, why are you talking about disarmament now? Now is not the time to talk about disarmament. No, now is precisely the time to talk about disarmament, because when the time comes, we need to be ready. So yeah, zooming out even a bit more, still focusing on the youth. Youth is also just, within not being weighed as down, there's so many different examples. For example, 2023 NPT PrepCom, and I know we were talking about the constant difference between youthful MSPs for TPNW and then the dready NPTs. Correct. But there's also youth participations at NPT, and actually here in Vienna, 2023 PrepCom to this upcoming RefCon, there was a wonderful youth side event which was connecting youth from Russia, post-Soviet bloc, the States, and then also other global youth. And they created a project where they took together online lessons and learned together and from each other, and then together they worked on different like communications project within the field. And so that was happening in a little side room while the plenary, the atmosphere was so awful. And it was just such a beautiful example of you know, in a time where diplomats in the main room couldn't agree on literally anything. Young disarmament professionals and young disarmament experts were actually practicing diplomacy just in the room next door. And I think that's really beautiful. The youth are also really good at seeing the linkages and different nexuses. So more on the intersectionality. And just to give one example, nuclear divestment, for example, is a fun way to look at things. I know that, you know, we constantly talk about the nexus of nuclear and gender justice, climate development, but a fresh, different perspective that I do like to think about is really the money, because, well, follow the money, see where it goes. But also it makes armament and weapons from, you know, an abstract concept, especially, which it is, especially when it comes to nuclear, a much more tangible thing. So we can talk about, you know, how many seconds of nuclear weapon spending does cover your student loan, or you know, in countries that claim to not have resources for education or for social services, healthcare, for example, but do find budgets for insane military spendings. So that's something. There's been many youth-led campaigns in nuclear divestment spaces, and it actually is a very efficient method to contribute to disarmament. Whole cities, whole governments have divested from nuclear weapons. Also, when I say divestment, just so we're all in understanding what that means, it's basically the opposite of investment. So it's taking money from one investment and then reinvesting it elsewhere. So for example, the city of Cambridge in Massachusetts has decided to divest from nuclear weapons. The government of New Zealand has decided to divest from nuclear weapons. And let me tell you, both New Zealand and Cambridge, Massachusetts are very nice places to live. And they're managing just fine without profiting from the corporations that contribute to nuclear weapon arsenals. So that was more on the intersectionality. And then turning back to inclusive and equitable participation. You know, when we say that young people are the experts on the substance, not just the experts on the youth, we've got proof, okay? Youth movements help drive some of the biggest disarmament tools that we know today. Of course, ICANN and TPNW is one example, but to go beyond nuclear, the Mine Ban Treaty adopted in 1997 was also driven by youth campaigns, as was the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which was adopted in 2008, I believe. And yeah, so there's many examples where youth weren't just a side role, but youth were actually driving the campaign. So if we want to see equitable participation today, which I do think is crucial, we need concrete structural fixes to address the issues that we've talked about today. First, pay people for their work. Police. It's not a voluntarism, it's an absolute must. Here, just a side note, I know that we often complain about, for example, UN's secretariat for not paying its interns. But guess what? That's the member state's decision. It's not the UN Secretariat's decision. So an action point here, lobby your government, talk to your government, ask why they vote against the UN Secretariat for not paying its interns. Secondly, removing the practical access barriers. Provide visa support early if you're asking people to travel. Choose wisely where you're organizing your space while we're at it. Offer hybrid participation and so on. Thirdly, building institutional pathways instead of just one-off invitations. Here I really see different fellowships or programs as a really good way to get in, especially for those of you on the younger side in the room. Some examples that I've seen work both as a recipient and as an organizer. For example, ODA runs its Youth for Disarmament initiative, which then has its different programs. For example, the Youth Leader Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons. There is a couple of alumni in the room here. Is I think a great program. Every other year selects 100 exceptional youth from the space, does 3 months of online programming, and then out of the 150 get to go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki to learn firsthand about the consequences of nuclear weapons. And then they're encouraged to go back in their communities and work on their projects to sort of spread the word for it. And that really, I think, is the most powerful way of making an impact in people's communities directly. Another example, CTBTO has the research fellowship. It's a great way just to learn a bit more. Or OSC has the scholarship for peace and security. That's for women only. Yeah, for women in security. I'm sorry, that's the fact. The underscore here is that these programs don't just bring youth into the room. They invest in youth. They provide them with education, with the skills that they need. And more importantly, they often sort of stay in touch with the youth and then offer different opportunities for them as well. And they really view them as, partners and stakeholders, not just products. Fourth, share power as well as space. That's sort of self-explanatory. It means, member states to ensure that they've got a youth delegate on their delegations, which is something that we've seen increasing mostly in the global north, but nevertheless, and generally creating roles where youth can meaningfully contribute, not just sit and take notes, as it sometimes is the case. Fifth, ground inclusion in real-world challenges. Ask people what they need. It's as simple as that. They will tell you. Plan for the realities of, financial pressure, digital access gaps still is a thing in 2025, mental health burdens, and career pathways, which again, for those of you in the field, I'm sure you're all aware about. And generally, that's, I think, what makes inclusion real and not just theoretical. So it's just a final note, moving away from tokenism. Of course, have to acknowledge it. There's a very, very fine line between engaging youth and exploiting them, and engaging youth and then having a photo up in front of a paper background. And to me, I really think that means, just fundamentally changing and shifting how we view success and how we measure success. Success in terms of youth participation shouldn't be about the number of youth-focused events that you organize, not by how many young people were in the room or how many people liked an Instagram post. It really should be treating youth as a two-way communication street, as an investment, as a key partner, and I think we're not quite there yet. Making inclusive participation more than just a promise. I think that's pretty much it. I'm excited for any questions or any comments or conversation afterwards. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Wanda, for sharing all these notes that resonated, I think, with many of us here in the room, especially also myself and also my teammates being young people in this field and navigating paving our path and navigating through all these challenges. I think it was hard not to agree and not to smile while you raised all these questions, and thank you very much. I think now I'll start with the Q&A, and the first questions will I'll start with the first questions, and I think then I'll give it to you, to the audience, to engage in the conversation. And I guess then I'll a bit biased here because my teammate also in the panel, but like yeah, I'll start first with you, Adia. What strategies or practices have helped you make sure youth activism translates into actual policy shifts? I'm actually very curious what you'll say on this, and to hear your answer on this.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for my adorable colleagues for your contributions. It was very interesting to listen to and to resonate with the whole with the scholarship and with the youth activism. So, yeah. So in terms of the strategies that STOP used, I think we were very lucky to start from the UN straight away. Like when we were founded, and then we visited the second MSP meeting of state parties, the TPNW, like the next month. So yeah, but then when we came back, the network that I talked about, it started to grow. Like we started to collaborate with the local senior colleagues who have been there for such a long time, and we saw our role there as being this, like a bridge between like these international communities that all and local communities that are sort of isolated from the even from TPNW spaces. And when we started to connect this audiences together, the points also started to connect, and the work that we've been doing, like it became more resourceful, more insightful, and even the fact that why are we serving on the working group in the first place? Because our senior colleague Mayra Bianova started it all. Like she's an activist and just a brilliant woman from Simei, and she wholeheartedly started this work on victim assistance and environmental remediation without knowing that TPNW exists. Back there in Kazakhstan, and all of the work that she's been done, we started to build on it, and now we also serve in this working group like as experts, and we also connected like our international colleagues like ICANN, Peaceboat to these processes as well. So in terms of the strategies, I think it is important to pay attention to who's there in the field, how to build this sustainable connections with the different audiences, with different actors, both state actors and non-state actors, and trying to be strategic about these relationships, because, well, just like meeting once doesn't work. You have to make people know that you exist, like on and on, and then trying to find these ways to collaborate. So yeah, I think this is the thing that we pursue now. We're still serving this as connections between different actors, and I think, yes, this is the strength and the practice that works, at least for us. And yeah.
Thank you very much. My next question will go to Nazirke. And in your speech, you emphasized and paid attention on raised the issue of not treating communities like research subjects. And of course, I think it's a critical and generally it's a fundamental question for many researchers right now, like working in different fields, not only in nuclear justice or like nuclear legacy. But can you share a concrete example or of a method or approach that helped you build a reciprocal relationship with local people, and where research also benefits them, not only to researchers?
So as we know, ethnography is inherently Western concept. It's very colonial, and nowadays what ethnographers do, they will go to the community, they will know the language, and the important thing is just to be transparent that why you are here, and talk with people, be with people, and it's also the question of how you frame that, how you write about it. You need to write. Not like I am writing on behalf of this population, but I'm writing with the population. You can always ask questions from the community, and actually making them to lead your research. Not like you are doing the research, but you are co-creating the research together, and try to explain the importance of what you're doing. And in terms of this extracting the knowledge, so usually the Western scholars will come to these communities, they will to write their papers, get their degrees, and they will leave. They will never translate their research results to the actual communities. They will never even acknowledge them in their papers, in their degrees. So what people do now, people would translate that into the language accessible for the communities. They will, in Kazakhstan, they usually have Telegram channels where they post the results of their research, or they have websites, or they do exhibitions, but like the public outreach should be there in any research. And in my case, it's very different because I'm also from the affected region. My family, my friends live there. And for me, I have another struggle as a researcher. For me, it's more of a how I cannot be biased, how I can be more neutral, if it's possible, and also how I can unlearn things. Because when I talk with people, they try to say me something like, oh, Naz, you already know this, and they will not talk with me about it. I was like, no, wait, I need this. And then they would like, yeah, but like, you're from that region, you know. But so yeah, my struggles is a bit more different than the other struggles. But what I tell to people, it's not like if you're not from the region, you are not allowed to study this region. Of course you're allowed. It's not like it's not like de facto you are from the region, I'm studying only my region. No, you just need to be transparent and very ethically, like do the ethical research, and that's gonna be okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your insight and also like your personal journey in it. And now my question to Vanda. I know you also use your social media presence really creatively. Like I follow your page and like bringing disarmament messaging into spaces that aren't traditionally like about security, like political, through fashion or through lifestyle or like sports. And like I myself a big fan of Nuclear Stories project, where you look at the educational project that you had like with this very short videos about nuclear legacies, nuclear history, or like podcasts that you did. And have you seen it help break the silence or reach the audiences that were traditionally out of, might not otherwise engage with nuclear issues? And I'd love to hear like how about your experience and how you think this kind of approach expands this conversation beyond this bubble we work in.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Well, first of all, I think I'm just constantly bringing disarmament everywhere because I'm just petty about it. You know, I got into disarmament almost by accident. I was in this huge counterterrorism phase. I saw myself working for like the FBI or something, and then I studied a bit more and realized how absolutely awful it is what they do, and complete disrespect for human rights and everything, and sort of shifted more into like the human security sort of way of thinking. And it's just to this day, and it almost angers me a little bit that at schools you don't learn about disarmament at all. You don't learn about peace. If you walk around the city, wherever you are, you will see statues of generals. When's the last time you've seen a statue of a woman or of a peacemaker? It's so sad. So it's just, you know, these little like Instagrams and little fashion things are just my little way of bringing the conversation up in different spaces. And I have to say it is quite useful. And it's been working pretty well. I think because it's the second you bring up these insane stories and the insane, you know, numbers we're spending on nukes, and it does grab attention. In terms of intersectionality, what's worked the best is definitely the links to the environment. 5 years ago, you know, it was so easy, or during COVID actually, it was the argument for human security and reimagining what we view as being safe and secure. It's completely shifted with COVID. And you know, the arguments of an army couldn't stop the spread of this. Your doctors could though. Where is that spending? How does that resonate? Was right there on a silver platter. That's within the European context, of course, changed since the Russian invasion. But it's still, you know, these intersections are still there and still function perfectly. I have to say though, from personal experience, in terms of narrative and advocacy, what's worked the best for me has been the divestment side and the money side, because that just makes it so much more tangible. You know, helping people uncover the corporations that are profiting from this, and then the insane power that they have. For example, How much time do I have for this answer? I don't.
Let's say like 5 more.
Okay, I can do that. So I'm not sure if this was like 2008 or 9, very early Obama presidency. They wanted to prolong New START, which was absolutely crucial. Of course, such a bilateral treaty has to go through Senate, right, or Congress. And so Obama puts it on the table, needs the signatures, and all of the Republican congressmen and then one independent basically replied that, yes, we are okay with this being signed. We're okay lowering the number of nuclear weapons, but only if we commit to spending more money on them, which is absolutely ridiculous, and there is no logic to it because they would have fewer of them but spend more on them. And it just, to me, it just showcases the massive lobbying power of corporations like Airbus, like Honeywell. It's pretty much every single big corporation on this planet that they have, because they pretty much, and this is really, personal capacity, space that they have on these big politicians, because they can come say, do you want to be reelected next time? You know what to say, you know how to vote. And so it's really intriguing to talk to people, to even those who have like small portfolios, like even, some people do little like investments in like Revolut, like $10 into this and $10 into that, just for fun. But this makes a difference. You can influence what your money does and where it goes. Every city has a pension fund. Every state has a pension. Every city has and it's up to you as a citizen, as a user of the institution, as a member of an institution, to inquire what your money does, especially when it comes to universities. You're paying tuition in a lot of countries. You're paying tuition. They put it up in a fund. You as a student have the right to know what the fund does and how that money is being used. The same with your bank. ING, for example, massively benefits from nuclear corporations. Yeah, I've got no monies and no savings, so I don't have much of a pull. But there's people who are, and the argument can be made. Like, I come to the bank and say, I don't want my money to be invested in this. And yeah, we are just individuals, but if enough of us does this, it can make an actual tangible impact. And again, governmental level it's been done, city level it's been done, all of the levels it's been done. So yeah, divest.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it is also really like useful for us to know, like, as young people working in the field, and like knowing that the field is like shrinking, and like the times are so scary, and like we feel anxious, and like how to bring more people, more like-minded people, and like young people, experts from different fields into the disarmament, so to be on the same page. And I think like it's really useful for us also to think creatively, like what other fields we could go into, what other doors we could knock, and involve people from that field into our space. So I think now I can open the round of questions from the audience. Please introduce yourself and.
My name is Diana, and I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Applied Arts here in Vienna, and I've been involved in like art exhibition organizing for Humanitarian, Austria. And I wanted to address my question to Wanda, because she raised a very good point about youth not being a homogeneous entity. A lot of big organizations treat the youth and activists in general. And I wanted to ask, how do you, for example, handle situations where different marginalized groups may have different perspectives on approaches, maybe what the different aspects of disarmament should be prioritized, and basically who is mediating those conversations between people of the same maybe marginalized backgrounds, but with conflicting perspectives on the same issue.
Thank you for that. So on the intergovernmental level, in the spaces where I get to work, at least, this is the utmost priority. Whatever program we organize, we do make sure that there is diversity across the board, not just geographical, but of course gender, and of course representation of marginalized communities. If there is, and we've actually have experienced this, there being conflict within even the language being spoken, but then it's we can be mediators, we can be negotiators, but we are not denying the space to anyone to enter. In fact, we're actively trying to bring them into the safe spaces. I will also flag that on the intergovernmental level, politics, it still plays a role. So for example, and then it depends who your funder is, right? So for example, a project that I work on is fully funded by the government of Japan. There it's extremely difficult to be talking about the TPNW. Even though they virtually, they're literally funding a project for nuclear disarmament, but we cannot explicitly be saying abolish. So it's also just a little bit of a diplomacy about like how to label things and how to phrase things so that it's not like a red flag, but it still allows you to bring these people into these spaces. So yeah, just diplomacy and trying to be as subtle, but giving the spaces.
Thank you.
That's yeah.
First of all, thank you very much to the four of you for this amazing panel. Like literally, I couldn't help but like notice so many points that you guys made. Yeah, with that, my name is Eduardo, and I am also currently a master's student for international human rights law. And I guess the question that I have for you guys is more based on experiences. So if any of you guys want to answer that question, totally welcome. So we talked about the kind of difference between symbolic and substantial inclusion in terms of like youth inclusion, youth activism, and then ultimately it does come down to these structures that we operate in. So I guess my question is also to that, from your experiences so far that you made in the area, what direction do you think that youth inclusion is headed? Do you think that there is like a kind of trend or tendency to actually include your opinions, or is it actually more performative and symbolic?
Yeah, but saying like Kazakhstan, sharing from our experience, our participation in the working group. So the working group is focused on the development of the socioeconomic development plan for nuclear affected regions. Like in 30 years, this is a good development basically, but the working group doesn't have, no, that's a harsh word. They seem to have less of an understanding like what's going on internationally. So like the fact that we are there is quite interesting because we are actually bringing this discussion back to there. But at the same time, being like Kazakhstan is very, and on a side note, Kazakhstan is very patriarchal society, very much, say like very much, like when you're young and when you're a woman, it's hard. Not only like in the policy tables, but basically like in different spaces at home, for instance. And it was interesting for us, like we didn't expect, so we didn't know what to expect and how are we going to be treated there, because, well, a person who just finished the bachelor's degree is going to tell what Kazakhstan should do in terms of its international commitments, like how does it sound? And, but we were, like, I was genuinely, speaking on my personal note, I was genuinely surprised that the person, like the head of the working group, was actually very appreciative of the inputs that we made, and the fact that they were ready to collaborate on us further, like being very much appreciative of the recommendations that we had. Like for the whole summer, we basically worked successfully, probably because like the whole perception of our work was very much respected. And you can see that, well, as I said in my speech, like it seems like you were evaluated not based on your age, but on the substance that you bring to the table. And for Kazakhstan, like for a person coming from there, it's actually very much positive development. And if this happens not only in, let's say, in victim assistance, environmental remediation field, but also encompasses some other fields like, healthcare, gender, and all the other spaces, youth participation might become much more substantive than it is now. So I'm very much positive about it. We'll see.
Does any of you have anything to add? Yeah, should we do that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I worked a lot with the activists, and most of them would say that youth activists are good until they realize they're underpaid. So until they would have some need to have money, when they will actually face the problem of money, because they also need to live, and you cannot just live by the enthusiasm. You have to sustain yourself. So that's why it will all depend on the, it will all depend on that issue at the end, I guess.
I would maybe just to play a bit of a devil's advocate and counter everything I've said so far. I do think that in some ways tokenism can still be a win for the young person involved. You know, at the very beginning of your career, when you're, because again, we do need to have an income, we do need to sustain ourselves, right? Like at the end of the day, with a master's degree, the assumption is that at some point you want to make a career out of what you do. And in a field as difficult to handle as peace and security and disarmament one, it is about the extracurriculars. It is about the extra points that you can get. And you know, the field, the expectations for young people have gone up so quick, exponentially in the past couple of years, you know? Like 10 years ago, all you needed was to speak English and you were hired. Now you need 4 years of unpaid internship, 5,000 languages, and then maybe you'll get another unpaid internship. And then I do think that it is about, you know, I've spoken at the UN, I've done this fellowship, I've done this, I've spoken to this person. So I wouldn't, you know, poop on all of these spaces as long as you know how to utilize them for yourself and as long as you can make it worth your time. And yeah, cautiously optimistic. For example, the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs Youth for Disarmament program, they really try to bring the youth into different intergovernmental fora. For example, 2024 the high-level meeting on the occasion of total elimination of nuclear weapons in September. There is, of course, every high-level meeting gets to be addressed by a civil society representative. Usually it was just 1 or 2. So it's highly selective. It truly is an honor to be one of the 2 people. I did it as a young person when it was COVID times. It was online. And then I've learned maybe like a month ago that they played the 2 messages that were selected like at the very end. So maybe like 3 people stayed in the room. So for my CV, great, I get to say that I addressed a high-level meeting, but in terms of impact, nothing. Last year, 2024, IGRIM that was mentioned was invited by Y4D to speak, and they made sure that she got to be in the room. She was flown in. She was in the middle of a program, and ODA made sure that she was heard and she got her points across. And that's a massive improvement. And it's purely because, you know, ODA is lucky to have people who push for these things and who make sure that this happens. So yeah, cautiously optimistic.
Thank you for sharing these insights. And like, even like, just to add from my perspective, I mean, like, I also represent here like 2 organizations, both FES and STOP, and I call myself like, yes, I'm the youth activist for nuclear justice, but like I also have this privilege to be an activist because I have another job like FES that pays my bills, but like, because most of the times the work we do at STOP is unpaid and we do it just for passion, because we want to do it, but not everyone has this opportunity or has this privilege to combine all these things, because it's really hard and it's really challenging, and like all the points that mentioned here today, like it's really true, and there has to be addressed by many decision makers, but unfortunately we're not here today. But yeah, any other questions? If not, I understand we're all tired, and it was a very intense discussion, both like the first panel and the second, and then I think we can now close up. And yeah, I want to sincerely thank you for all our panelists, and for all of you, Nazirke, Adia, Vanda, for sharing your time, sharing your experience, expertise, and insights, and supporting us and our event and coming here today. It's really very we really appreciate it, and like having you and your honest reflections here and like being so engaging and open is really valuable. I think especially like in settings like Vienna, where usually it's mostly like states, governments and international organizations talking all the serious talks, but having these like honest conversations is also important, and like making our field and work grounded. Yeah, and it's not, I understand it's not easy to fit all your thoughts and experience in 5 to 7 minutes into panel. And yeah, but thank you for managing that, and thank you for doing that. And of course, thank you to Dialogbüro Vienna colleagues and to Nuria, who helped organize this event, and my Tatiana and all the team that was involved in the organizing, and also my friends and teammates, Älisher, Nadia. It is really crucial, and it's like a big step for us, both as Steppe and FES Kazakhstan, to be here. And yeah, bringing community voices to Vienna, having Benetik and also joining us. And like, unfortunately, Valentina couldn't make it, but also like having her on like feminist perspective on this in disarmament was also like very important for us to bring it here to Vienna. I hope everyone here might be tired, but still like inspired as I am to act. And I hope you leave this room with some thoughts and new ideas, new have some inspiration to do something, like hiring young people, giving them opportunities, open the doors for them, and simply continuing this after this conversation after the event. Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to pass over to Älisher and maybe Nuria for closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I don't say much time, but I just wanted to say, unfortunately, as Rebecca, she's not with us today in Vienna, but I just wanted to share that actually this year in summer, Valentina brought a personal essay, a reflection for the New York Times opinion that called "My Generation's Deadly Inheritance," and I recommend to you to read this reflection on her trip to Hiroshima and how it connected with her experience as a young person, as a peace building and gender advocate from Ukraine. So it's lovely and beautiful essay, beautiful reflection that came on New York Times opinion. And yeah, you can just type on Google Valentina Ortan, you can find her name in the program and New York Times, and it will come up, but the name is My Generation's Deadly Inheritance. So yeah, I hope you will read her essay and her reflections after the event or during the dinner that we will have. So yeah, but again, yeah, thank you very much. And I know that I guess Dialogbüro took a bit of a risk with this kind of event, because it's not the usual theme, the usual topic for the organization. But I mean, one of our goals, one of our aims as an organization, as an initiative to bring the conversations about disarmament, about abolition, about nuclear justice to different spaces. And we're very, very grateful to Nuria and the whole Dialogbüro team that they supported us and provided the space for this conversation, because it's the nuclear justice and disarmament and nuclear weapons. It's not just the part of Kazakh history, it's not just the part of Marshallese history, of Japanese history, or the history of the world. It is our reality. And it's the great task for us as a humanity to abolish and give up nuclear weapons, and we should speak about it more, especially in the spaces in the spaces like Vienna and here, as it is the kind of a center for global diplomacy. international relations. So yeah, I think it was a great opportunity to meet with all of you, to meet with friends, colleagues, and experts from the field. It's really amazing, and thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you, Älisher. Thank you, Zhilek, Aliya, and everybody who was here. I'm sorry for my English. To compare to you, my English is not so good. So I want to say for our organization, that everybody who is working here has activist history. So we probably don't speak, I don't speak English so much with my, I'm sure. And so it was for me extremely important, especially this panel, but for the first panel too, because you have a right. So there is not so still there is not so much space for activist voices to say. So it's not just men with usually old men or with we should talk about something what is important for our life, but we too. And I just wanted to say again, thank you, your team, and every expert who is here, and sure to my colleagues, to Tatiana. She's project manager in the fellow Vienna project, and she made this translation and everything to our colleague Aybul. She's not here, but she made everything with media. My colleague Natalia and Rufina, they're here, and you saw that they helped a lot. And my colleague Alisa. So it's important to say every name. And I want to say, if you have some ideas to cooperate, to organize something here, so we are really ready and happy to support you. So on different ways. And so we will continue now by small catering our conversation, and just one things more program for our democracy and gender democracy, or gender justice. Not democracy is not enough. Yeah, it's not democracy. For gender democracy, for our program is extremely important. The colonial focus, and today, so I think it was for me very decolonial event. Thank you, organizer. It's a real organizer of this event, and so yeah. So I wish you good evening, and we can continue to honor. And thank you, Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung Kazakhstan. So it's good cooperation, because the different political organizations should be work together.
Those who are joining online and viewing us in YouTube, I don't know if there are so many of you, but yeah, thank you for joining us. Yes. Thank you.
And look, our program in 1 week, we have a third fellow here, Katerina Zikova. She will talk about some structures of indigenous people identity. So yeah, welcome. Next.